Hello everyone. Welcome to the Poddercast.
Welcome to the Depth Dive. You've shared some really interesting material focused on how to achieve your goals and become more productive. So for you, we're gonna, cut straight to the heart of it and pull out the most valuable insights.
Indeed. What immediately stands out across your sources is a powerful connection between focused intention and, making really smart moves when you're pursuing something significant. We're going to explore the core principles and some very practical ways to put them into action.
Think of this as your personal guide to navigating all the advice out there. Our goal today is really to equip you with clear, implementable strategies so you can be more effective in what you do and hopefully feel a greater sense of control and less overwhelmed by everything on your plate. Okay, let's dive in. One of the first concepts that really resonated with me in your sources was this idea of, thinking on a grand scale.
Yeah, what's compelling here is the argument that if we don't set our sights high enough from the start, we inherently limit our potential. Your sources provide some fantastic examples. Take Arthur Guinness, for instance, securing that 9,000-year lease for his brewery. That's a vision that extends far beyond immediate concerns, right?
Absolutely. That's thinking in terms of legacies, not just, quarterly reports. And then you have J.K. Rowling, who envisioned all 7 Harry Potter books before the first one was even finished. That's a complete, expansive vision right from the outset. It makes you wonder if that initial ambition played a key role in their extraordinary success.
It prompts an interesting question for you, doesn't it? How often do we truly allow ourselves to think without those self-imposed boundaries? The authorities acknowledge that large-scale ideas can sometimes feel, intimidating. We can get bogged down in the details of execution before we've even fully formed the aspiration.
That's so true. You start thinking about all the steps involved, the potential obstacles, and suddenly that exciting big idea feels just too big to even start. But the core message here is that this kind of limited thinking really does cap our potential. We're essentially putting a ceiling on what we can achieve before we even take the first step.
Yeah, and if we consider the broader historical context, think about any significant breakthrough from flight to space exploration. These often began with someone imagining something that seemed, frankly, impossible at the time. The sources rightly suggest that we've often underestimated what we're capable of. So, what aspirations might you be holding back right now simply because they feel too ambitious?
Definitely something to reflect on. Now, shifting gears a bit from thinking big to actually getting things done, another key theme revolves around our trusty companion, the to-do list. We all rely on them, right? But your sources really challenge our conventional approach.
Precisely. The typical approach is just to compile a list of tasks, and perhaps we tackle them in whatever order they appear, or maybe based on what feels most urgent or easy. But a crucial insight here is that not all tasks contribute equally to our goals. Not even close.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The discussion introduces the Pareto principle, often called the 80-20 rule. Could you explain the core of that idea?
Certainly. This principle, observed by Vilfredo Pareto and later applied to business by Joseph Juran, essentially states that roughly 80% of your outcomes tend to result from about 20% of your efforts. Juran observed this in manufacturing and General Motors, where a small number of defects caused the majority of the problems. Pareto himself noticed this pattern in, wealth distribution.
Okay, so how does this apply to our everyday tasks then?
Well, the implications are significant. On your to-do list, there are likely a few key activities, that 20% that will drive the vast majority, that 80% of your progress and overall success. The real challenge and the opportunity lies in identifying those high-impact activities and making them your absolute priority.
It really makes you rethink how you're spending your time, doesn't it? Instead of just working through whatever feels most pressing, we should be constantly asking ourselves, which of these tasks will actually create the most significant forward momentum?
Exactly. Consider your current workload. Which 20% of your tasks, if executed effectively, would lead to the most substantial results. Focusing your energy there is where you'll see the greatest return on your time and effort.
Okay, so we're encouraged to think big, and we're thinking strategically about our tasks using Pareto. Now, how do we actually pinpoint those most crucial activities? Your sources introduce this idea of a focusing question.
Yes, this is a remarkably effective tool for gaining clarity. The focusing question is, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary?
That's a powerfully simple question, isn't it? It really forces you to cut to the core. And the sources point out that it's applicable at different levels, right? Like macro and micro.
Yes, exactly. There's the macro level, your overarching goals, your big picture for your life or career. Asking the focusing question here helps you identify that primary one thing you're working towards.
Like your ultimate career aspiration, for example, or maybe a major life goal.
Precisely. And then there's the micro level, the immediate actionable step. Here, the focusing question helps you prioritize what you need to do right now to propel you closer to that larger goal. The example given was something as concrete as make that specific phone call, very tangible.
So it's about both having a clear direction and identifying the most impactful next step. It's not just about knowing where you want to end up, but also figuring out the very next action that will give you the most leverage.
And the real power comes from asking yourself this question consistently. Regularly posing it creates a series of focused actions, each building on the previous one, generating momentum, and driving progress towards your ultimate objective. What comes to mind for you as your one thing right now, even if it's just for today?
It definitely makes you pause and really consider. Now, we all know people who seem to possess an almost superhuman level of discipline, right? Effortlessly achieving their ambitions. Your sources actually offer a really interesting perspective on this, particularly with the concept of building habits sequentially.
What's intriguing here is the way the sources challenge this notion of constant, unwavering willpower. They suggest that highly successful individuals aren't necessarily exerting immense self-control across every aspect of their lives. Instead, they strategically apply discipline to cultivate beneficial habits selectively.
The example of Michael Phelps is so compelling. Someone diagnosed with ADHD, perhaps not naturally inclined towards intense focus, yet he achieved extraordinary success in a sport that demands it.
Exactly. His achievements weren't about suddenly developing an iron will across the board. It was about directing his discipline into establishing one fundamental habit: swimming, every single day, for nearly a decade. That consistent action became almost automatic, a core part of his routine.
Right, and the idea is that once you've solidified that one habit, it becomes easier to layer another one on top, right? Like the example of getting to the office a little early to clear your inbox, and then leveraging that uncluttered space to focus more deeply on a key task.
Precisely. It's about creating a positive chain reaction. You intentionally use your willpower to establish that initial habit, and once it's ingrained, you can then direct your focus towards building the next one, and so forth. It's a far more sustainable strategy than trying to overhaul everything simultaneously through sheer willpower, which rarely works. So what's one small habit you could realistically begin to build today?
That makes a lot of sense, focusing your efforts on building those foundational habits one by one. Okay, another productivity term we hear constantly is multitasking. We're often led to believe it's an efficient way to accomplish more, but your sources present a pretty different view.
They do. The original meaning of multitasking actually comes from the realm of computer science, describing a single processor rapidly switching between tasks. And that analogy is quite revealing when we consider human behavior.
Because while we can technically perform some actions concurrently, like walking and having a conversation, our capacity to truly concentrate on multiple complex tasks simultaneously is quite limited, right?
Exactly. What we often perceive as multitasking is actually just rapid task switching. And research indicates that there's a time cost associated with this constant shifting of attention. A penalty, really. It takes time to disengage from one task and then reorient yourself to another, especially if it's mentally demanding.
Yeah, that scenario of working on a spreadsheet and then being interrupted by a colleague really resonates. When you return to the spreadsheet, you've lost your flow, you need to reestablish your focus. All those little interruptions add up, don't they?
Well, absolutely. And those brief moments of lost focus accumulate significantly over the course of a day, particularly in a busy professional environment. The statistics cited in your sources about workplace distractions and the amount of the workday spent just recovering from them are quite eye-opening. It really makes you question whether attempting to juggle multiple things is actually saving you any time at all. The advice is clear. Identify your most important task in a given moment and dedicate your full, undivided attention to it.
So we should probably ditch the multitasking myth and aim for focused single tasking instead. Now, speaking of focus, your sources also explore the nature of willpower itself. It's not this inexhaustible resource we can just draw upon endlessly, is it?
That's right. The analogy often used is that of a finite energy reserve, or maybe like a muscle that gets fatigued. Our willpower diminishes as we use it throughout the day. Every time we make a conscious choice to focus, suppress an impulse, or modify our behavior, we're tapping into that limited resource.
And that explains why we might find it harder to resist, say, a tempting snack later in the day after we've already made numerous decisions or navigated challenging situations.
Precisely. That depletion of willpower, sometimes called ego depletion, can make us more vulnerable to those immediate gratifications. But the implications can be even more profound, as illustrated by that study involving Israeli parole judges.
Right, that was a particularly compelling example. The judge is showing a significantly higher likelihood of granting parole at the beginning of their sessions and right after breaks, suggesting their decision-making was influenced by their level of mental fatigue or willpower depletion.
It really underscores the point that when our willpower is low, we tend to revert to the path of least resistance, the default option. In the case of the judges, that was often to deny parole. It highlights the importance of strategically structuring our day so that we tackle critical decisions and demanding tasks when our mental energy is likely to be at its peak. Don't save the big stuff for 4 p.m.
So it's about being mindful of when our willpower is strongest and prioritizing accordingly.
Got it. Now, a vital skill that's closely linked to protecting our focus and willpower is the ability to decline requests, to say no. And your sources acknowledge that this can be challenging for many of us.
It certainly can be. We often have a desire to be helpful and accommodating, maybe avoid conflict, but your sources emphasize that saying no to less important requests is actually crucial if we want to allocate our limited time and energy to our most significant priorities.
The example of Steve Jobs returning to Apple is so instructive here. He didn't just introduce more products, he dramatically reduced their product line from like 350 down to 10. His quote, "Focusing is about saying no," really resonates. It's a powerful illustration, isn't it? True focus involves not just what you do choose to engage with, but equally, if not more so, what you consciously decide to decline or ignore. And your sources offer some practical approaches to saying no, constructively suggesting alternative solutions, perhaps redirecting the request to someone else or a different resource. Furthermore, proactively thinking about how to minimize unnecessary requests in the first place, maybe setting up FAQs or clearer processes, can be a real game changer. What's one thing you could realistically say no to this week to free up some mental and physical space?
Definitely something worth considering. A necessary skill, really. All right, let's pivot slightly and revisit the bigger picture again. Your sources highlight the significance of living with a sense of purpose and also the power of visualization.
Yeah, what's thought-provoking here is the hypothetical scenario presented. Imagine having absolutely no goals or aspirations. What would that feel like? It really underscores how essential goals are for providing direction, meaning, and motivation in our lives, particularly when we encounter obstacles or, the inevitable tough patches.
Without a clear goal, it's hard to imagine staying motivated through those challenging, less enjoyable tasks, isn't it? There's no overarching why driving you forward.
Exactly. And your sources go further, emphasizing the added benefit of not just setting goals, but also vividly visualizing the process of achieving them, not just the end result. The study with students visualizing their preparation for a test, actually seeing themselves studying effectively, rather than just daydreaming about the good grade, is a compelling example of how this mental rehearsal can enhance motivation and lead to improved results.
It's kind of like that analogy of wanting to climb Mount Everest. Once you have that clear, compelling objective, it immediately sparks planning, research, training, action. It provides the central point of focus for all your efforts. And your sources encourage us to define our own one thing on that broader life goal level.
It's about identifying that core purpose, that North Star, that guides you and shapes your decisions about how you spend your precious time and energy.
Okay, now this intense focus on professional goals might understandably raise concerns for some about neglecting their personal lives, work-life balance, right? Your sources actually address this with a really insightful perspective on prioritizing work time, not just balancing it.
Yes, the common pursuit of a perfectly balanced life, where we attempt to divide our time equally across all areas, is examined critically. Your sources suggest that this can sometimes lead to a dilution of focus and, paradoxically, underachievement in all areas. You're spread too thin.
The James Patterson analogy of juggling 5 balls is so vivid here, work being represented as a rubber ball that can bounce back if dropped, whereas family, health, friendships, and integrity are depicted as glass balls that can shatter if neglected.
It's a powerful, maybe sobering reminder that neglecting those fundamental personal priorities can have irreparable consequences. However, the solution isn't necessarily about striving for perfect equilibrium at all times, which might be impossible. Instead, it involves ruthlessly prioritizing our dedicated work time around our most critical professional goals, allowing other less essential work tasks to be minimized or delegated. The crucial point, though, is that those glass balls in our personal lives should never be compromised. They need protection.
So it's about being incredibly focused during our allocated work time on what truly moves the needle professionally, while simultaneously safeguarding those non-negotiable personal aspects of our lives. It's not about equal time, maybe, but about intentionally prioritized time. How can you better prioritize your work time around your most significant professional goal right now?
That's the key question to ponder. Now, finally, even with the best intentions and a strong focus on our one thing, life inevitably presents unexpected challenges and, well, just stuff happens. Your sources acknowledge this reality and discuss time management in the context of accepting a degree of chaos.
Right, because the world doesn't suddenly stop just because we're intensely focused on a major project like closing a significant deal or writing a book. Other responsibilities will still demand our attention, and things might temporarily feel out of balance in other areas. Laundry piles up, emails go unanswered.
Exactly. And the advice is to some extent, accept that temporary disarray.
Yeah.
Trust that achieving success in your primary focus area will eventually contribute to simplifying other aspects of your life down the road. It's about recognizing that intense concentration in one area might naturally lead to a temporary imbalance elsewhere. You can't keep all plates spinning perfectly all the time.
But that doesn't imply we just let everything else fall apart completely, does it? Your sources also touch upon effective time management strategies to navigate this potential chaos.
Absolutely not. It involves things like scheduling and vigorously protecting dedicated blocks of time specifically for working on your one thing. Treat those appointments with yourself as non-negotiable. Put them in the calendar. And minimizing distractions during those focus periods is essential. Turn off notifications, close tabs, maybe even change your physical work environment temporarily if needed. Go to a library or a quiet room.
So it's about creating those intentional pockets of deep, focused work where you can make significant progress on your most important task. while acknowledging that other less critical things might need to wait temporarily. You manage the chaos, you don't eliminate it entirely. What's one block of time you could dedicate to your one thing this week? And what steps could you take to minimize distractions during that time?
Powerful questions to consider as you move forward. So, to bring everything together, the central message that emerges really powerfully from your sources is that extraordinary achievement doesn't typically stem from attempting to do everything simultaneously, but rather from laser focusing on that single most critical thing at any given time.
Right. It's about cutting through the noise, the clutter, the endless possibilities, and directing our energy where it will have the most significant impact. And in this deep dive, we've explored how to set those ambitious goals, how to prioritize ruthlessly using things like the 80-20 rule, how to minimize distractions, and ultimately how to achieve those meaningful results.
Yeah, we've examined the importance of ambitious thinking, applying the Pareto principle to our task management, using the focusing question for clarity, building habits strategically and sequentially. The downsides of multitasking, the finite nature of willpower, the power of strategic no's, living with purpose, visualizing the process, prioritizing work time effectively, and accepting, even embracing, a degree of temporary imbalance or chaos.
So for you, our listener, here's some key actionable advice distilled from all of this. First, prioritize your to-do lists based on the potential impact of each task. Recognize that not all activities contribute equally. Find that vital few. Second, make it a regular practice, maybe daily or even multiple times a day, to ask yourself the focusing question. What's the one thing I can do right now, such that by doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary? And third, really try to resist the urge to multitask, especially on important cognitive tasks. Choose the most important thing in the present moment and give it your full, undivided attention. Consider choosing just one of these to implement immediately. Start small.
And as we conclude this deep dive into your sources, maybe consider this. If you consistently direct your focus toward your one thing, whatever that might be for you, what truly becomes easier or even unnecessary in your life? What burdens might lighten, what complexities might simplify, simply by channeling your intention with such focused power? It's a compelling question to carry with you.